moderator, speakers, media friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Dr. Mohammed Al-Ali, Director General of Trans Research and Advisory, I am delighted to welcome you all on a very special occasion. Today, we celebrate our 6th anniversary. This is indeed a proud moment for us. We have made great progress in these 6 years. We have produced some world-class research, published insightful papers, and organized very exciting events. But this is just the beginning. We are determined to achieve more milestones and build our reputation even further. However, we cannot achieve our ambitions on our own. We aim to work with think tanks worldwide to better understand the world around us. We want scientific research to find creative solutions to global challenges. Together, we can make the world better. Together, we can serve humanity. Thank you very much, and I look forward to an interesting session this evening. I now give the floor to Mr. Jonathan, who will moderate today's session. Mr. Jonathan, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. It really is a pleasure to be here, especially on this inaugural session on the 6th anniversary of Trans Research. I want to congratulate Dr. Mohammed Al-Ali, the Executive Director, Director of Research, Ahmed Al-Astan, who is helping working with us tonight, and Sumaya Al-Hadrami, the Head of Conferences. So thank you very much. I want to welcome you all. My name is Jonathan Furziger. I'll be the moderator. We have a panel of experts spread across the planet. So let me say good evening from Abu Dhabi and from Jerusalem, where I sit. Good morning in the US, good afternoon in London, and a pleasant good night when we wrap up here to our experts in China and Australia. Our discussion here is about a tricky subject that I've wrestled with for more than 30 years in journalism. My background is as a reporter. I worked for the past 20 years at Bloomberg News in Tel Aviv. Bloomberg sees a large part of its mission as telling the story of the intersection between business and government, between money and power. I had a lot of experience reporting on politics, on war and peace, starting with the Gulf War in Saudi Arabia. But when I had to report on stocks and bonds and international trade and sovereign wealth funds, I needed some help. So one of my most important reporting tools was a file of cell phone numbers to people who would return my calls at think tanks in Israel and New York and London and Hong Kong. Think tanks are of special importance today when reporters are dealing with critical questions about the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot of misinformation out there that gets picked up in the media. It's not easy to keep things straight when sometimes the key sources of information are coming from government, even sometimes from the White House. In short, that's in large part why, in my mind, we need think tanks. We need repositories of knowledge where people can go to get real facts about this pandemic and help people across the world separate what's true and what's false. Just recently, I joined the Atlantic Council in Washington as a non-resident senior fellow based in Jerusalem and specializing in the development of ties between the Gulf and Israel. It is a great pleasure and an opportunity to be invited by Trans Research to moderate this discussion. So let's start it off. Okay, we have 6 experts today, 6 panelists. The first one is Dr. Professor Wen Wang. Professor Wang is the Executive Dean of the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies and Managing Director of the Silk Road Think Tank Association. He also serves as a consultant expert for the People's Bank of China and at China's Foreign, Finance, and Commerce Ministries. Dr. Wang specializes in global governance, significant power relations, green finance, and macroeconomics policies. He has edited and written over 30 books, including A Promising China, a think tank scholar's global speech, and Green Finance for the Belt and Road Initiative. So Professor Wang, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Johnson. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. But now I'm in Beijing. I should say good night. Now it's 11 o'clock p.m. So anyway, thank you so much for the great invitation. So let me share something. So I was a journalist for 8 years, and have been the executive dean and professor of Songyang Institute, Renmin University of China, leading a think tank in China for 8 years too. So I'm really confident in speaking about the relationship between think tanks and the media. The key point which I would like to share today is that during the outbreak of a pandemic, the social position of think tank and media have been challenged unprecedentedly. And the three negative ideologies in the world are increasingly impacting the proper roles of think tanks and media in the world. Please allow me to explain in detail. First of all, think tanks and media share one similarity. They both produce and disseminate ideas, knowledge, and wisdom. So this production and dissemination have contributed immensely to modern human civilization in the 20th century. So especially since the end of the Cold War. So both think tanks and media have showed signs of convergence due to the rise of professionalism, what I want to say. So the leading think tank nowadays increasingly have media functions such as Brookings, CSIS, RAND, the Heritage Foundation, and other well-known think tanks. They spend more than 20%, 30%, or 40%, even 60% of their annual budgets on social communications, including website development, conference organization, report presentation, social media, etc. So for higher quality communications and influence of ideas. On the other hand, top media nowadays are increasingly similar to think tanks, such as Forbes and The Economist, of which research reports have high quality and playing guiding roles in development of the world economy. So this trend also confirms the theme of today's conference, think tank and media. So what I want to say is that think tank need media and the media need think tank. But more importantly, think tanks in 21st century should enhance their media function and should learn more about how to spread the ideas to influence the government. And the media responsibilities include the need for serious dissemination of ideas instead of the tabloid and the gossips. So this is what I want to say. But I believe that they are the consensus. You will agree with them. But I want to say that what worries me now is that because of the COVID-19 hitting the world nowadays, the humanity is facing the biggest crisis since 1945. Nearly a million people died from the coronavirus over the past 7 months, and 200 million people faced unemployment or wage cuts, and tens of thousands of companies or enterprises went bankrupt. But in this very special period, think tank and media, to my honestly, did not playing a positive role as they should be. In other words, we can say that the roles of think tanks and media are far from the level they are expected. More than 6,000 think tanks and 40,000 newspapers and TV stations around the world should rethink about itself. First, the think tank and media should stop the spread of the crisis in March, but the reality was not. By then, the virus had hit the whole world, and the think tank in every country should have provided policy advice and suggested governments to adopt the social isolation in order to stop the spread of the virus as much as possible. The media should have urged all the people to believe in medical science and encouraged them to wear masks. Unfortunately, think tank and media failed to do so. Second, think tank and media should find ways to promote international cooperation and human solidarity. But the reality is that they did not, or we did not. I'm a think tank scholar too. If the two major powers, China and the United States, had cooperated to fight against the pandemic since March, and if think tank and the media had found a way to promote the global governance, perhaps they would not be so many deaths. But unfortunately, some think tank even found ways for the Trump administration to suppress China or add fuel to the friction between China and the US, and even lead the relationships of the two countries to the brink of the new Cold War. So, but what I'm not complaining about think tank and media. So I'm a think tank scholar too. Many think tanks and media are in many countries are very rational, professional, but their responsibilities have been impacted by three major ideologies, three very, very negative ideologies. The first one is anti-intellectualism. Many people in countries who do not believe in science and medicine, and who do not recognize the opinion of professional research institutions. Some of them, or many of them, believe that this pandemic is a conspiracy or biological war, and so on. So the belief in the conspiracy of origin of this pandemic, instead of promoting people to unite against the COVID-19, now has become the mainstream of public opinion in some countries, so as to suppress the influence of the professional think tank and the rational media. So a very interesting phenomenon is the Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top virus expert in the United States. He is very, very professional, but many Americans don't trust him. This is very interesting. The second reason against the professionalism is populism. In number of the countries, there are a lot of people who put individual interests and the freedom above all things, put too much faith in the feelings of the ordinary people rather than in the opinions of professionals, or in the interest of collectivism. So for example, many people in some countries initially did not believe that wearing masks can protect their health, but believed that wearing masks affected their freedom. So they did not care if they were affected by the COVID-19. So as we know, wearing masks can reduce the chances of infecting others. That's the second point. The third reason against the professionalism is Trumpism, Trump, Trumpism, Trumpism. What I want to say is, prior to my honest, President Trump doesn't trust the media, and rarely use think tanks. Trumpism greatly trusts personal experience. And what's worse is that he tweeted to rule the country. And each tweeter has more influence than most media and think tank. And under the impact of the Trumpism, the United States, as a world, the unique superpower, became the irresponsible and did not do the leadership. Instead, it became the biggest source of contagion in the world after April, to my honesty. So my conclusion is that, how can we do? How can we do? I have 3 suggestions. First, the first is to rediscover consensus. Think tanks and media have to rediscover the common ground. Nowadays, a very serious human crisis is happening right now. So it's not a conspiracy. It's not a biological war in any country, but a real human disaster. The disasters should have been reduced, but they are still spreading. At present, the virus in China has been basically under control, and the economy has recovered more than 90%. And in 2020, China economy will be the only one with positive growth among the world major economies. But Chinese are very worried about the security of the world. The United States is still the country with the largest number of the infection in the world. And the number of infection in India and Africa will surpass the United States very soon. And once winter comes, the virus is still in danger of recurrence. 1 million people will die soon. And we cannot have 1 second 1 million and a third 1 million. So if we do not have a consensus, it is entirely possible that more than 3 million people will die due to the COVID-19. So think tank and media needs to consider the various ways to this end and provide effective advice to our government. And this first point. And second point is that to respect life. Life only comes once. We all know. Every life has his or her own family. Freedom is very, very important, but life is more important. In the past 7 months in China, from babies born only about 30 hours to elderly people in their 100s, and from foreign students in China or foreigners in China, China has spared any efforts to save every life. So human value and dignity must be based on life security, life safety. So think tank should criticize those extreme idea of freedom first, and the media should spread the value of life first. So in my opinion, free competition is correct in economy, but it's wrong in crisis. The third point is unity and cooperation. Nowadays, China-US relationship are currently at a very dangerous stage. The Chinese government has started on many ways that China is unwilling to fight the Cold War with United States. And China hopes to have dialogue with United States and hopes to cooperate in fighting the pandemic with United States. But unfortunately, most of the American people, most of American officials cannot hear. So American societies has been deeply influenced by the Trump Twitter, and American diplomacy and soft power have been destroyed by the worst Secretary of State in history, Mr. Pompeo. So if there is a new Cold War or even a hot war between China and the United States, it will be a greater disaster for mankind. So think tank and media all over the world need to find ways to promote China and US cooperation rather than provoke the struggle between the two countries. So finally, so as a veteran journalist and a think tank director, so I'm wondering, or I'm asking a historical question to you about the future. After 100 years, in 100 years in the future, so how will people in the future describe our generations of media people and think tank scholars? If nowadays the situation continue to be worse, will the future people bring us for our lack of wisdom and strength, for being the instigator and slacker of this generation's crisis? So please, my friends, so think it over and over with me. So that's all. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you.
Professor Wang, thank you very much, and thanks for kicking it off with that challenge. You know, there's some drama in what's an epic relationship and between China and the U.S. and the different approaches that we see coming from Washington and from Beijing. So with that, I'm going to move on to Dr. Stephen Blackwell. Dr. Blackwell is the head of research and strategic studies here at Trends Research. He is an analyst and researcher and writer with more than 20 years of experience in think tanks and academia and media. Dr. Blackwell is the author of a book entitled British Military Intervention and the Struggle for Jordan, King Hussein, Nasser, and the Middle East Crisis. He's also written for the opinion and news analysis sections of The National. Dr. Blackwell previously worked as a researcher at the Emirates Center of Strategic Studies and Research in Abu Dhabi. Before moving to the UAE, he was head of the European Security Program at the Royal United Services Institute in London and editor for Jane's Sentinel Security Assessments. And with that, I give you Dr. Blackwell.
Hey, thank you very much, Jonathan. I'd also like to add my welcome to our moderator and all our panelists, and indeed everyone who is following this online event tonight. You're all very welcome, and thank you for following us. As was mentioned in the introduction, Trends Research and Advisory is celebrating its 6th anniversary this month. And is building up the momentum of its work, its activities. We've become one of the most active think tanks in the United Arab Emirates, and have built a growing network in the Middle East region and internationally. Through events and publications, we have engaged in many debates relating to important contemporary issues, and we've also developed productive relations with local and international media. And especially at the moment, we are expanding our reach and influence across a full range of social media platforms. Of course, this year, we've all had to deal with the difficult circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I sense that it's accelerating trends that were evident already at Trends itself. We have increased the momentum of our online engagement. We've targeted a growing audience through, so far this year, we've had 11 online symposia. We have made frequent media appearances as opinion pieces, press releases, and other printed forms. And also we have frequent website publications. And I sense that we're heading towards a world of virtual think tanks. This online engagement and these kinds of online events are going to become more and more important. Now, the point could be made, perhaps, that almost everybody who is online is their own virtual think tank. So that's fragmentation, if you like, or perhaps we could say democratization of some would say thought leadership, or at least thought contributions. That means that those who present themselves as think tanks have really got to work that much harder to cut through. And of course, with the advance of technology, news cycles are increasing in pace, and particularly from the perspective of think tanks, it is going to become harder and harder to maintain current levels of engagement, accelerate current levels of engagement, and of course, regardless of how the technology may influence the development of the think tank sector, media and think tanks, of course, will always need to engage with each other. They have strong incentives to engage with each other. While think tanks, of course, require the media to propagate their research findings, especially to policymakers and an attentive or receptive public, the media, of course, need think tanks' expertise to explain issues and analyse current affairs, and increasingly breaking news as it develops, often very quickly indeed. At the same time, perhaps we can note a lack of capacity on the part of some journalists to understand and report on important issues. While on the other hand, some think tanks suffer from weak media relations and therefore inhibited and obstructed from promoting their expertise and making sure it is disseminated as widely as possible. These factors, from the perspective of both sectors, they do pose obstacles to effective engagement. But from the perspective of trends, we're of course trying to identify and explain the broad contextual setting for breaking news, and providing real-time analysis, data and comment to aid public understanding of key issues. But think tanks generally, I think, in order to influence the news agendas of the future, need to enhance and develop their understanding of the needs of journalists, and ensure that they can quickly access the essential information and comment they need in order to develop their news stories. We at Trends, of course, we work hard to cultivate our links with journalists by inviting them to our events and briefing them on what we are trying to achieve in terms of our research objectives. So our feeling here is that we have moved quickly enough to adapt to the changing circumstances, which we've all had to face a difficult time this year, and increasingly online provision of debate, discussion, information through events such as these, through other kinds of online engagement and interaction. It will become increasingly the norm. And if anything, you know, we can try to sort of predict how think tank media engagement will evolve in the future, but we can certainly be sure that as technological innovation gathers pace, then this relationship will be broadened and deepened, I think. But it will need to move much faster. Experts are still very much in demand, but of course are faced with this fundamental challenge of cutting through, of somehow breaking through the chatter and the sheer chaos and commotion of the online world, of the internet, and ensuring that their voices are heard. So I think I'll conclude at that point, because I want to leave plenty of time for discussion. And once again, thanks to all of you and to our audience. And I will hand back to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. We're going to move on now to Jeffrey Hyday. Jeffrey is the Director of Media Relations at RAND Corporation. one of the most prominent institutions in the universe of research. Before joining RAND in 2008, and Mr. Hade was Director General for External Relations at the Asian Development Bank in Manila and Head of Media Relations at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in London. Mr. Hade was a journalist for 13 years at the Wall Street Journal, at Dow Jones Newswires, at the Providence Journal, and the Charlotte Observer. And he's been a frequent commentator on CNBC. So, Jeffrey, take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan. Very interesting thoughts we've heard so far. I'll just cover 3 points. One is what I'm seeing RAND and other think tanks do in terms of trying to shed timely light on the pandemic, a bit about how RAND has gone about putting the word out, and a few thoughts about steps moving forward. Maybe first, good for me to note that think tanks come in many different stripes. Some are closely affiliated with a government or a party. Some have an agenda, advocate for a particular ideology, and some, like RAND, are avowedly nonpartisan. So that's the perspective I'll come from today, and I suppose to be best prepared to represent. At RAND and a lot of think tanks, our mission is to support the public good with fact-based research and analysis and try to be objective. And our view, our hope is that that approach can help assess the effects of this monumental crisis and actually help policymakers figure out the best way forward. Just a few things that we've been looking at RAND, and I can tell you that this pandemic has caused quite an explosion of research activity. A few we've looked at are what it might take for the global economy to recover from the pandemic, how schools, teachers, and students are dealing with the transition to distance learning. Short answer is not so well. We are looking at the risk of voting in the US this fall. We have a big election coming up, and we have done survey work that suggests that most voters, certainly not all, think that they'll be safe enough to vote, but they may also need to mail in ballots here in America. And we've also looked at the role of the post office and whether they can handle a projected surge in mail in ballots. And as some of you may know, this issue has been politicized to an extent. On the health side, we've also looked at issues such as how can hospitals ensure they have sufficient critical care capacity to treat a surge of COVID-19 patients. Maybe one of the most important things that we have been working on, and this is to build on Jonathan's point about disinformation. We've been doing work for a few years on a phenomenon we call truth decay. This is the diminishing role that facts play in making important public policy decisions. It reflects diminishing trust in government and in media. And what we have right now with the pandemic is really something of a worst case scenario. We've looked back at prior episodes in the world of this truth decay, where the public has really lost its faith in government and media going back well over a century. These things tend to happen. We tend to come out of them. But currently, we are certainly in a fairly severe stage of truth decay. And so particularly bad during the pandemic. It's just the kind of environment where false and misleading information thrives, and it spreads quickly. As one of our researchers on this topic, Jennifer Kavanaugh, she's mentioned, this is a time where people are vulnerable, people are afraid, they don't know what to believe. And it's a really unfortunate time for trust in organizations to be fairly low. Dr. Wong mentioned that trust in media is quite low at the moment, but I would also say trust in government, at least in the US, is not terribly high right now. there's higher trust in the medical community, but it's still not that high. So it's a dangerous mix in the context of a pandemic. And just to give one example, without sufficient trust in at least some of these parties, once we get a vaccine for COVID, maybe there won't be enough people who are trusting enough to take it. So it's important that we do what we can to deal with this trust issue. And actually, we are beginning to see the tide turn. We may be past the worst of it, at least in the U.S., in terms of trust issues. We see some early indicators that trust in media is ticking up. So those are just a few of the important questions that we're looking at RAND, and we are hoping that our efforts can inform policy responses. And I had a great time preparing for this talk and surveying everything or many of the things that other think tanks are up to. I looked at what Urban Institute and Brookings and Heritage and AEI, and at least in America, are doing. It's all very, very impressive. But just a bit about what we're doing here to make the connection between our research and get it to the public via the media. I can tell you that the supply and demand is high. The supply of new research is very high, and the demand is the same. And as Dr. Blackwell was just noting, the point is to make sure that you have a proper apparatus to get it out. So we have devoted most of our resources to doing just that. We have created a podcast series we did not have before. That is where we speak with our experts and then disseminate via a mix of media and a video and audio online. Op-eds. We have published about 150 op-eds on the pandemic since it started. We've set several internal records. We're not chasing quantity, I can tell you that at RAND, but it's just happened. More op-eds in a single quarter, more op-eds in a single month than we have ever dealt with before. And we're publishing in a variety of top-tier media, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Fox News, as well as outlets in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Just last week, we had a piece in USA Today that was talking about getting this issue of building trust and getting facts out there. One of the things that has been discussed here in the US is whether children might be less likely to transmit COVID-19 than adults. So our researchers who have studied this essentially poured cold water on that idea, and we disseminated that via an op-ed in USA Today and said that it's based on flawed science. Our experts have been delivering testimonies on the Hill here in the US, which we certainly promote to the media. We've been sending advisories to the media about certain aspects of the pandemic. This year, our folks have conducted over 1,000 interviews, most of which have been about COVID. It's highly unusual. We have plenty of other things going on in the world, but this is really catching the most attention. The coverage has been, thankfully, not only voluminous, but it has been quite fair and accurate, I would say, in the main. So this pandemic, while there's plenty to worry about, from my seat, it seems that the media are trying to take this seriously. And obviously there are the occasional transgressors, and we go after them to say, please correct the record. But for the most part, we're getting fair and accurate coverage. As for next steps, it seems to me that both from a research standpoint as well as a dissemination standpoint, we're going to need a lot of creativity to make sure that we are tackling the right questions, and that we are. Sorry, Jonathan.
Hello? Go ahead.
Just to wrap up, that I think we're going to need creativity in our research, creativity in our dissemination, agility, and certainly credibility. And I'd like to think that think tanks have not only a role, but a responsibility to provide scientific information that's not political and to shed light with facts and objective analysis. I think that's going to be good for government and the public. So I'll leave it there. Back to you, John.
Jeff, thanks very much. And thanks for introducing the phrase truth decay. I think I can get some.
A little pun.
Okay, now let me introduce Pete Clifton. Mr. Clifton has been editor-in-chief of PA Media for the past 6 years. Now, PA Media is a fairly new name for one of the UK's most venerable news organizations, the Press Association. Mr. Clifton began his journalistic career on a British evening newspaper and started at the Press Association as chief sub-editor of the sports desk. Clifton then worked at the BBC for 11 years as editor of news and sports websites, head of News Interactive, and head of editorial development. He also worked for 3 years as executive producer at MSN UK before returning home to the Press Association. So please, Pete, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will just endeavour to share my screen with you all, and then we'll take it from there. Hopefully you can see that now. I have to say that the brief I had was talking principally about how PA coped during the lockdown. So there is a bit of that, and there's not a huge amount about think tanks, but having listened to the discussion, there's a few things I'll say about our approach to coverage and the role I think that we have to play. And so bear with me if a couple of the slides look a bit rubbish because they're not exactly fitting the brief. But for those of you who don't know, PA has been around for 152 years. I haven't been there all that time, but it feels like most of it. And with the National News Agency for the UK and Ireland, and we have hundreds of customers in the UK and Ireland and many more abroad, but the likes of the BBC and Sky and all the national newspapers and regional newspapers and major websites like MSN and HuffPo and others will take great swathes of content from PA. They don't always credit us for the content, but our content is the backbone of what appears in the UK media on a daily basis. So we have a lot of responsibility there. We are known for breaking news, so we're noted for the speed with which we respond to stories, which is a theme we've just heard mentioned. We're also known for our accuracy and our impartiality. So when we send out content to our customers, they know they can use it straight away. It will have been properly sourced and checked, but we don't have any axe to grind. We don't have a role to tell people what they should be doing. We should present stories factually, and we should call on as many sources as we can to make sure that we're presenting a balanced, accurate picture. So that's kind of what we're about. I mean, just to say that we have a very slick operation in a number of offices across the UK, including our main newsroom where all of our specialists are based and all of our general reporters. And that very well worked network was broken up within 1 or 2 days, and everybody went home basically. We were fortunate that everybody was equipped for hot desking in our new newsroom, so we all had laptops, but everything else we kind of had to make up overnight. So a team of about 350 journalists, previously coordinated by that very busy newsroom, top right, was then coordinated by that very empty newsroom underneath, and everybody was doing that from home. But that transition had to happen without any interruption to our coverage. So we continue 24/7 coverage. We'd let customers know what we were doing, and then we had to get on and do it. The logistics of doing that are here. You know, some of them aren't particularly relevant, but I mean, essentially, we had people all over the country who were now trying to maintain this august range of content, meeting all the editorial standards that it all had done, but with people in many different parts. So my main news editor is currently based in a converted goat's hut in South Wales, so about 400 miles away from me. I haven't seen him for 5 months, but he still runs the day-to-day operation. And it was all really about how we changed the way we communicated. So everything now is about video conferencing. And we have to organise our specialists working from home. So that's the way that we've worked. And again, this has worked pretty well. And we've had to maintain this body of content. And there's a bit to say here, I think, about how we do that. We won't be the only place, I'm sure, where, you know, there's an awful lot of spin around announcements, around the data, around the figures. It's not our job to say, well, we PA don't necessarily believe that this to be the case, but it is our job to make sure that we find a variety of voices who will challenge or give us more context or give us more data to support, you know, whether what's being said by government is true or not, or whether there are other interpretations of it. So although we don't have a viewpoint, it's definitely our role to make sure that our stories and our reporting has got a good body of expertise that will be commenting on it and having a view on it. So really, again, to echo something that was just said, a lot of that is about the speed and the availability of the expertise, whether it's at a think tank or other bodies of expertise. It's all about having those people who are readily available. We know how to get hold of them, and when we get hold of them, they will know the story that we're talking to them about. And there's a way that we do that, which I'll come on to in a moment or two. But that's what we're looking for, and we're increasingly looking for people who are available to do that in video as well. So, you know, one of the upsides of the pandemic has been everybody now knows how to use Zoom or Teams, and so a lot of our interviews are now conducted in video where they might have been on the phone before. Now this allows us to make a lot more of what we get from those experts. We can write up some of those comments, but we can also do video packages which we can offer to broadcasters and so on. So having people who are geared up to respond in that way is a very important part of our day-to-day operation. And we actually have another part of our business where we put in decent cameras in universities and other bodies, and we can plug in those experts not only for our own use, but we can pass on those experts direct to broadcasters, and they can make use of them as well. So, you know, we have a number of ways where we're kind of the glue in the middle, where we can make those people available direct to some of our customers, particularly the broadcasters, but also the way that we interact with those expert voices is very important to us. I suppose the other thing that we do reliably is that when think tanks have research they want to release, they almost always will come to PA. We'll often issue that under what we call an embargo. So we'll do it early on in the day and it will be embargoed till midnight. And then all of our customers have time to work on what they want to do with the content, and then it gets released at midnight. But for a think tank that wants a reliable way to get their messages and their research out, PA is seen as a very reliable way to do that. That's not just to say we'll just produce it verbatim, and you know, if there are people who will challenge some of the views that's come from that research, then we'll certainly carry those as well. But that's what PA can help to do. I'll say the other thing that we've really focused on during the pandemic is the data. Now we have a data journalism team, which is something we didn't have in years past, and their role has been to interrogate the data that comes out on a daily basis and actually dig deeper into the data to find out some of the stories that exist below the data, some of the trends that aren't being talked about in the, the official reveals of the data, and to start coming up with more interesting insights into regional variations and trends. And that's something that we're doing. The release of data by the government, and because we have devolved nations now, the data is very haphazard. It doesn't always meet up across the 4 or 5 different nations. And so part of our role has been to try and make sense of all this data that's coming out from different sources, and inform our customers with whether it's graphics like the one you can see here, or written pieces that like this, the front page of the Metro. That was just our interrogation of the data, going back historically to find out what the real story was about care home deaths, and that wouldn't have come out any other way had we not invested the effort in doing that. So I think there's something we've done a lot more of, is find the truth in the data that actually is very widely and publicly available here, but not everybody has the time to interrogate it and make the sense of it that hopefully we have too. I would say, I heard mentioned earlier, encouraging people to do things. It's not our role to encourage people to do anything. We will do Q&As, often backed up with expertise and guidance on why masks might be a good thing, but there'll be a view that they're not a good thing. There was certainly lots of Public Health England advice early on that masks were of no assistance whatsoever. So those were stories that we covered, but always with alternative views that actually there is a body of opinion here and internationally that it is a good thing. So it will be our role to reflect those views and maybe do a Q&A where we ask simple questions and put some answers, and people can understand the different views. But there would never be a piece from PA that says, right, everybody, you've got to start wearing masks, because that's not our role. We will present the facts and we will present different views. That's what we're there to do. I mentioned one other thing about data, just briefly, because it's another way that we have, I think, given far more information about what's happening than we would ever have done before. We have a new service now called Radar, which was partly funded initially by the Google Digital News Initiative, which funded 6 humans, reporters. Radar actually stands for robots and reporters and data and robots. And the reporters are the people who interrogate all the data sets that are released on a daily basis by the government, the National Audit Office, and various other bodies here. And then they identify the data points that will tell the story for every part of the UK, right down to individual towns. They'll then write some basic data phrases that will help to illustrate the story, and then we push the 2 things together. And you see an example there on the right of a story that was a template that was written once, but then the data points and the phrasing is brought together to be relevant for that specific town. So on a daily basis, we could produce a story about every area of our country with just one reporter doing it. And as a result, we were producing 18,000 stories a month from that team of 6 people. They're only short, simple stories, but they were very widely used and continue to be. And I think that use of data and using it in a semi-automated way has allowed us to kind of cut through some of the noise and actually allow the real story around the data to be told in a very clever way. The only other thing I'll mention is we've made it a lot easier for our customers. The pandemic played into our hands, and we were about to launch a new platform that brings together all of our content in a single place. And because it works so well at home, thousands of journalists from our customers queued up to get it in double quick time. It would have taken us a year or more to do this, but in fact, we've done it in a matter of weeks. But the other interesting thing to say is it's a platform that will show you the stories that we're doing. It will show you the pictures and other things we have around the story. It will show you the very latest news coming in. It will show you our digital versions of the stories that we offer to websites, and it will show you all the video that we have available as well. And the only reason to show this is this is a platform that we also make available to non-media customers. So they can't publish the content, but a whole range of PR companies, think tanks, and other public bodies will take this website and they will use it as their reference point to know exactly what we're covering. And so when we ring them for comments and for reaction, they will often know that about something that's gone on because they will have seen it on the platform that they take as a service from PA. And within the platform, there is a route for them to send comments direct back to PA. So we are being a lot more upfront with non-media customers about the things that we're covering, and we're giving them a very direct route back to give us their input into the things that we're covering. And they can see our diaries and they can set up email alerts to know when their sector is mentioned by PA, just to give them that kind of advanced view. This is not particularly relevant. This is just about where we are as an organisation, and I'm sure for lots of you too, these things will be similar. We've closed a number of our smaller offices. Our footprint in the main office will be a lot smaller, I think, in the future, and we will be, I think, a lot more nimble as a result in the way that we can use video conferencing and messaging and Zoom calls for interviews to give us actually a better, quicker response very often to the stories that are happening on any particular day. That's it. I hope at least a small percentage of that was relevant. Yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Pete. I want to thank you in particular. Yes, it was relevant, and there was a very good inside look at the nuts and bolts of running a news agency in the era of COVID. So let's move on. First, I want to apologize. I think I disappeared from the screen for a minute 20. It's pretty extraordinary. Just last week, they opened up direct links between the UAE and Israel. So I'm missing for a minute. Yeah, I think we're ahead of the game. Let's move on now to Michael Holtzman. Michael is president of U.S. operations for the global public relations firm SEC Newgate. He served as director of public affairs at the Council of Foreign Relations in New York and has been a media and political advisor in the White House. Mr. Holtzman led the international communications teams for 2 successful bids to host the Olympic Games. Those were in Beijing in 2008 and Vancouver in 2010. And he's advised numerous organizations and governments in challenging situations. Mr. Holtzman advised Panama President Juan Carlos Varela during the Panama Papers crisis and Singapore's government during the SARS epidemic. So, Michael, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Trends, again, for inviting us here. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear these different perspectives. And what's emerging are that there's so many related topics that really deserve singular attention. Dr. Wong spoke earlier about the rise of anti-intellectualism, and this really is the crux of the problem in many ways. And think tanks, stock and trade are facts and objective analysis, and you're basically selling to people who aren't buying. And it raises questions about whether or not we should be thinking about media literacy in the wake of this and how we manage this new era of social media and misinformation and these other realities that have descended upon us in terms of how we manage crises. There was a comment made earlier about, the media starting to act like think tanks. I think, at least in the U.S. perspective, you've had the opposite effect. That news hole, as we say, for foreign affairs or science or medical news has shrunk dramatically over the last 20 years. And as a result, you have underinformed people, less media literate people who are then, being, asked to basically break with that culture in order to embrace facts and medicine and science suddenly. And you have all these, this confluence of challenges during a crisis. So my topic was supposed to focus on the media perspective, and so many have covered this already. And Pete, you talked about radar, and that was going to be sort of a part of what I was going to focus on because it's such an interesting example. But in general, having sat at both the government levels during crises and within think tanks and in the private sector, speed and clarity and accuracy really do matter. It's not an exaggeration to say that it could be the difference between life and death, this ability to get information to people that they can then act upon. And governments, despite the winnowing away of government's power to civil society, still really alone have the capability and the legitimacy to manage crises. And they face tremendous challenges in getting out factual information, especially if they themselves are not dedicated to factual information. Not to mention obtaining real-time on-the-ground information. What is that loop? And the loop comes from think tanks, and it comes from independent analysts, and it comes from the media who really have those shock troops out in communities and are able then to relate information back to the government. And governments, of course, in addition to that, also have this role in delivering aid and other logistical support. So the media, as we've heard from the other panelists, plays an absolutely crucial role in providing this information to make people aware of a situation. They have the ability to calm people, to organize people, to equip them about consequences, to alert them to hazard warnings, to gather and transmit information about specific areas, as Pete described before, even alerting the government when there is a need for rescue or relief situations. So never before has the value of the media, and in my opinion of think tanks, been more clear as during this pandemic. It's the first and most obvious opportunity for the media in the crisis, is demonstrating its indispensability to the public good. Facts and context are obviously what think tanks specialize in. So in theory, the nexus between the media and think tanks has never been greater during a crisis, but for many reasons that Dr. Wong outlined, that is also facing its own challenges. But let me focus for a moment on some of the media challenges that the other panelists, some of whom have focused on, but I'll focus on these in particular for my comments today. One, news organizations in this context have to convey the seriousness of the crisis without provoking panic. They have to keep up with a torrent of information, much of which remains a mystery, and continually advising readers and viewers how to stay safe. Anyone has surely, at least in the US, walked that razor's edge between panic. You've seen panic shopping. You've seen how tenuous that is. And that is, again, that confluence of social media, which plays, in my mind, a very deleterious effect upon people's psyches, peddling panic and angst and scarcity. And the media does have a role in, I think, helping manage that. Another key challenge is battling coronavirus misinformation. Many panelists have spoken about this, but public health professionals are trying to provide the world with facts about the spread of coronavirus. They're facing a flood of propaganda, of misinformation, and we're really wrestling with the first major global crisis in the smartphone era, and we really have to be conscious of that. It's important that we also differentiate right now, for the moment, media, which I was asked to focus on, and social media. Obviously, we understand the distinctions between the two, and we cannot ignore, however, the role that social media is playing. You're seeing think tanks and the mass media starting to adopt some of these techniques of instantaneous ability to communicate. And speed doesn't always mean accuracy, but I think, again, going back to Pete's comments, that media has taken this crisis as an opportunity to innovate its ability to gather and disseminate information in very segmented ways, things that would have been impossible a decade ago due to this crisis, forcing to innovate. And some of that is through automated reporting, as he mentioned. Finally, media practitioners have to face up to the possibility that they may end up being much more than non-participant observers, which is really what they're supposed to be. We saw Chris Cuomo get sick right on live television and on CNN and battle coronavirus as he's reporting on coronavirus. So these lines, these traditional lines of kind of dispassionate non-participant observation are completely blurred in this era. Every reporter knows somebody who has died or gotten sick from coronavirus. It could be a parent, a spouse, a child. This is unprecedented as well, I think, in terms of the blurring of those traditional lines. And it's important to remember that the media and think tanks and even government, all industries have been disrupted by the pandemic, and media organizations are trying hard to adapt to this shockwave. Journalists are confined to their homes, as Pete was describing, doubling down on efforts to combat disinformation, at the same time keeping the audiences informed with very timely quality news. And by the way, also providing enough information, and this is where I may take issue with some, to challenge the government's responses. This is, there's both a need, as Dr. Wong pointed out, to have solidarity during crisis. Really, the only way to overcome this particular pandemic is through some degree of solidarity. But at the same time, we must question government. It is essential that we hold government accountable. And the role of that traditionally has been with the media, but the media's real handmaiden in that are the think tanks who are able to look at, for example, the spending of government spending on stimulus funding and find out that a great percentage of it were going to people who didn't need it and corporations that didn't need it. That came from independent analysis, and that enabled the media then to hold the government accountable, who then responded to that. So it's another area where think tanks in particular play a critical role along with the media. So again, I don't want to be redundant to what Pete said, but the media's adaptation to this new world through automated journalism, and I think you're being modest in back in March, if I recall right, a radar editor tweeted that the agency managed to file and generate about 150 automated stories on COVID within a single hour. I mean, this is extraordinary. And so there's enormous possibilities with these automated systems in which reporters can monitor multiple locations, multiple health authorities, and give information that is interrogated and vetted back to people almost in real time. Of course, there are challenges to this. There's some embarrassing situations. The LA Times in 2017, after records were updated in a geological database, the newspaper's automated software for seismic alerts, QuakeBot, warned readers about a potential earthquake, but that earthquake actually took place 92 years ago. So even though they're coming from a reliable source, any data input really needs to be questioned critically, and every automated story checked before publication. You also have this new phenomena of advanced data visualizations. These are these really cool charts that are really popular and impactful, showing and they're translated into multiple languages, which are simulations that track potential responses to coronaviruses, potential spreads of outbreaks. So we've seen these, and these are then marbled into deeper coverage. The New York Times also has very ambitious data visualization projects underway that I think are also being accelerated due to coronavirus. You also have this issue that many of the speakers today have addressed, which is accuracy and fact checking in an age of misinformation. And you have one initiative that maybe Pete, you can speak to a little bit, the Trusted News Initiative, which is the BBC and Agence France-Presse and Reuters and the Financial Times and a number of other organizations who collaborated with Facebook, Google, and others to set up a shared alert system, basically, on what would be considered harmful coronavirus disinformation. So this is sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval. If a story has been vetted for harmful coronavirus disinformation, that's of enormous public service right now, because there's such a glut and people remain intensely confused over what is fact and what is fiction. And you're seeing a number of these entities springing up. There's a fact-checking network at the Poynter Institute, Coronavirus Facts Alliance that they're calling it. And you're seeing this sort of aggregation of organizations at university levels, think tank levels, and news organizations who are creating these deep learning algorithms that are able to basically look at stories very quickly, look at information, and make a determination whether or not it is factual. And I think as these debates rage over things like speeches by Donald Trump, the ability to fact check live videos of speeches and debates would certainly be most welcome, but certainly making them slightly delayed and then offering an analysis or conclusions in an informative box at the bottom of the screen would be very, very useful in this era as well, especially when it comes to holding our government in the United States accountable for what is almost a criminal level of intentional truth decay. So while the pandemic has created all these challenges for the media, it's also created opportunities to innovate the entire sector. And I think, again, Pete, I applaud your presentation because it really focused on those innovations, not just about the workplace itself, but about the technological innovations that are underway, not only to compete with social media and its own turf, instantaneous real-time information, but with a level of accuracy that's been unprecedented. Think tanks also, and this goes back to Dr. Wong's excellent presentation, have to adapt too. You know, I worked at the Council on Foreign Relations and helped organize the Public Affairs Office to look more like a war room or a situation room in which we could organize subject matter experts and analysis in a real-time way to comment on something that was considered to be breaking news. And at that time, we did not have an advanced social media presence. You had things like Foreign Affairs, which is a quarterly academic journal at the time, not quite the right organ to be responding to instantaneous crises. But by nature, crisis is a very fast-moving river, and things like task forces, study groups, and quarterly journals are not really suited to that. They're not built to suit. And that does not mean that we don't need that long-form type of thinking. I think there's going to have to be a very serious post-mortem done about all of our institutions once the greatest risk of this pandemic are over. We have to think about things like media literacy and the role of social media and the role of traditional media and think tanks. We're in the storm right now, and the challenge primarily is providing timely, constructive, relevant analysis that moves at the speed of a crisis. And I think we've heard from some of our panelists their opportunities to do that. So it doesn't mean to abdicate, but think tanks really have to start thinking about that and thinking about organizing their public affairs offices in a crisis mentality. So that's, you know, not just developing relationships with reporters because they're facing the same issues. It could also be, you know, creating open channels with them, creating dark sites that you pop up information that can upload content immediately. You know, there's a lot that needs to be done to innovate both of these industries as they remain disrupted. Think tanks really aim, at least from my perspective, at improving decision making. If you look at COVID, again, it was economic think tanks. I think it was the Institute for International Economics, the Peterson Institute, that was able to scrutinize that public spending in real time and then find those inequities and inefficiencies. Then the media picks up the ball and held government accountable. And that's a real example of that symbiotic relationship between these institutions during a crisis. And then there's one last cautionary note, and I think, again, you know, RAND is really always been the exception to this rule, but there's a credibility threat here where the think tank landscape is increasingly becoming fragmented by politics and ideology, that they're producing content that reinforces a set of political views or a set of prejudices, right wing or left wing, and they adhere to those, whether it's, you know, AEI, Cato, or Heritage on the right, or CAP on the left. They're not entitled to their own facts. You know, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And when these partisan think tanks speak to and speak through like-minded media, because the media has become increasingly fragmented as well. You have Fox over here, and you have MSNBC in the United States on the left and right. They each communicate these with a certain agenda. There's no service really being provided to the people and to policymakers. You know, we have to remember news is north, east, west, and south. You know, it's supposed to be the full picture for people so that they can make their own decisions. The ironic tagline of Fox is "We report, you decide," but that truly is the ultimate test. And think tanks and media really need to start to think about that and understand that this fragmentation, this disaggregation from fact and in the name of ideologies and factions is a tremendous disservice, and it's really led to this very cumbersome, awkward response we've had in the United States and our awkward embrace of fact. So I think COVID is, just to summarize, a real inflection point for the media and for think tanks alike. And Trends, again, is to be commended for what they're doing, because this is a real-time effort to assess the continued efficacy of think tanks and how they, along with the media, can continue to be good global citizens. So I'll leave it on that point.
Michael, thanks very much. That was an important contribution about the landscape of think tanks and media and how they match up with varying ideologies. Is something that I've given a lot of thought to, and we all ought to. Okay, now rounding up the panel, we're moving to Australia. Dr. John Bruni is, oh my gosh, it must be very late for you. Um, he is
I'm glad
Dr.
you raised it.
He is the founder and CEO of the SAGE International Australia think tank in Adelaide. He helped create the conceptual foundations for the security dialogue between Australia, Japan, and the US. He also played pioneering roles in research on asymmetric warfare in Australia and the UAE while working as an academic at the University of Adelaide. Dr. Bruni is an analyst for Jane's Intelligence Review and an often quoted media commentator. So go ahead, Dr. Bruni, please.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Firstly, greetings and assalamu alaikum from Adelaide, South Australia to my fellow panelists and to our audience. To begin with, let me say that it is an honor to be invited to this E-Symposium on the 6th anniversary since the founding of Trends Research and Analysis. So, let's briefly recap the most obvious and distressing aspect of COVID-19. There have been 27.3 million cases registered in the world today, of which 18.3 million have recovered after having contracted the disease, and 891,000 who have died from it. I suppose it is heartening to note that the recovery numbers far outweigh the figures of those who have died thus far. The problem is, as we know from those who have recovered from COVID-19, that the disease leaves many who have caught it with long-term health complications, some of which being quite serious. What we also know from the disease is that lockdowns, social isolation, social distancing, face masks, and the application of hand sanitizer are the primary means of controlling the pandemic. But we also know that lockdowns, social isolation, and social distancing has had disastrous implications on the global economy, as manufacturing requires optimal staffing levels to operate efficiently. This has hit less developed countries hard, as the beneficiaries of globalization, where many manufacturing jobs have been outsourced to low-skilled, low-cost countries, as factories have closed in order to protect employees, critical shortages of goods have been and continue to be experienced. In other cases, entire industries have been severely crippled or wiped out as a consequence of the disease, such as the international airline industry and tourism. Australia, for instance, has just entered its first period of recession in 30 years, something of a shock to a generation used to nothing but economic growth and good times. But the outbreak of the novel coronavirus has caused another major issue, the proliferation of misinformation and conspiracy theories, not helped by the fact that mainstream media outlets in each country is structured differently, having different relationships to the government and to the governed, while social media is essentially a wild frontier. Indeed, the World Health Organization coined the term infodemic, which is said to account for much of the emotional instability and distress caused to the public not knowing where to go for trusted information on COVID. This is not helped by the fact that experts in the field, whether associated with think tanks or government, are learning on the go. There is no pre-existing knowledge on the disease to leverage off from what is known about COVID-19 so far. Just as we get on top of some form of understanding, the parameters shift or new information comes in that supersedes the older information that we're working off. When looking at think tanks operating in this environment, it is safe to say that they are operating in a rapidly changing landscape and in a highly uncertain one. This complicates strategic communication. People want answers and certainty, especially when they are anxious about employment prospects, the health and safety of children attending schools and universities, and loved ones with compromised immune systems, especially among the elderly. Governments are also looking for certainty. What are the best ways to keep the disease at bay while scientists work on developing a vaccine? How can they reshape the national economy to adapt to the strictures imposed by COVID-19? What medical policies and healthcare systems should be put into place that can benefit the needs of the many? And how can a country recover from the economic damage caused by the pandemic? All of these questions need neutral, fact-based answers. However, The infodemic does not allow people to easily find trustworthy sources to guide their decision-making. And it presents challenges for think tanks, since much of the information in the public domain on COVID-19 has been attached to conspiracy theories, national political agendas, and personal crusades, deeply politicizing the way information is gathered and processed. To face this infodemic, think tanks must break through the noise of misinformation and overabundance of information to develop strategies to achieve positive social impact. Think tanks need to be creative in order to eliminate infodemic barriers. They need to translate ideas into language and formats that are accessible to non-academic audiences. Cutting through all of this is critical to servicing the public's need for unbiased information on COVID. Information that educates without instilling mass hysteria and fueling public anxiety. The job of the think tank today is a very difficult one. It is to deliver a message to the government and the people that is unknowable and yet still holds out the prospect for recovery and a return to business as usual. In order to be effective, think tanks must communicate their findings to a range of stakeholders: government, businesses, emergency services, national security agencies, and the mainstream media. The problem with messaging today is that in contemporary public policy, science bases its findings on clear facts. Policy recommendations look at shoulds. What should be done to avoid people laid off work from becoming the next generation on welfare? Should a viable vaccine come out, how will it be distributed? And how will governments fight anti-vaxxers or people who believe that every vaccine will come with a microchip so that governments can monitor their every movement? The general public is exhausted by the information glut on COVID-19. They want answers, but with so many differing views being proffered by so many different think tanks, some of which approach their advocacy from ideological rather than non-partisan viewpoints, cynicism of experts seems to be a norm among the public receiving their learned information. Many people here in Australia want answers as to why the state government of Victoria was so uniquely vulnerable among Australia's states and territories for not having controlled COVID-19. Much of the mainstream and social media have critiqued the Andrews government of Victoria for having been incompetent. But what exactly does this mean? If the Andrews government was incompetent, has anyone broken this down in a scientific, impartial way? It is a highly divisive issue politically, and much of the public rhetoric and analysis of the Victorian government has been coloured by where one stands on Daniel Andrews as Victorian Premier and the Australian Labor Party generally. For think tanks largely dependent on open source information, if the information they get from the mainstream and social media channels is so contaminated by public bias, it is difficult to independently criticise a person or an action. It is akin to a jury maintaining its objectivity during a high-profile trial. In a highly charged environment where people not only want answers, they want to hurl invective at public figures considered responsible for their problems, getting a narrative based on facts is difficult. In the West, this is compounded by the fact excuse me, it's approaching 2 a.m. in the morning here. In the West, this is compounded by the fact that a political party and government may not want an objective analysis to be publicly accessible. If the political party and government acts as a source of funding for a think tank, the managing body of the think tank may not find it advantageous to speak truth to power for fear of losing their funding. Under these circumstances, think tanks may opt for the safer course and advocate for whatever position their funding benefactor may want. Policy prescriptions too may well be driven by this out of sheer survival rather than for the public good. So where does the truth lie under these circumstances? Then there is the need to integrate the evidence from different scientific and research disciplines and to communicate the outcome, which is often complex. How do you say what is more important to do as opposed to if you have a list of particular things that you're confronted with? How do you present this to government and to the general public? So, have think tanks worked during the pandemic? Some best practice has included managing information streams on a weekly basis Also by simplifying complex messages such as flattening the curve so that healthcare services aren't overwhelmed. Will COVID-19 have a positive impact on how scientific evidence and foreign policy come together? It's too early to tell. COVID-19 has been a testing ground for science and policy communication. The confederation of these two very different styles is at best a work in progress. For communication, information has to be clear, consistent, and actionable. To be effective, the policy process, including the use of evidence, needs to be trusted. Then there is the whole issue of COVID's economic impact. The fact that in the pre-COVID international environment, there was a concentration of global manufacturing centers, mainly centered on China, connected by a network of global supply chains and just-in-time management structures caused some problems. There was no need to stock up on supplies since it was thought that the contemporary multilateral trade overlays could not fail. Now we know that these structures do have vulnerabilities, and when they fail, we run out of toilet paper, hand sanitizer, face masks, critical pharmaceuticals, and other goods necessary for daily life. Mines cannot produce as much when the workforce has either been laid off or furloughed. If mines can't get minerals to manufacturers in a timely manner, the goods upon which they rely tend to get smaller in quantity. The Chicago School of Economics' main idea is that free markets best allocate resources in an economy and that minimal or even no government intervention is best for economic prosperity. Many think tanks hold on to this idea that this form of economic philosophy is as relevant now during the pandemic as it was in the years leading up to it. There are few think tanks that are actively seeking ways in which the global economic structure might be changed to better deal with high unemployment and high government debt in a period of zero or near zero growth. When China's economy reprioritized to look after its own citizens, as well as implemented its own shutdowns, many countries started thinking about breaking the global supply chains they were reliant on and to start reshoring critical manufacturing capabilities. This has very much been viewed from a political perspective as playing the anti-China card, when in fact the idea of having national backup plans should multilateralism fail should have been communicated very differently, such as through the vulnerabilities caused by dependence on only a few global manufacturing centers. China did not have to be mentioned as much as it was. Obviously, Premier Xi's response to what he and the CCP saw as international China bashing did nothing to ease anxieties and tensions over China's role in the origin of COVID-19, since Xi's response was quickly conflated to other issues linked to China's rise, such as the current Sino-American strategic tension on trade, North Korea, Hong Kong, human rights, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and the Taiwan Strait. In terms of strategic communications during COVID, we have seen successes and we have seen many failures to communicate rationally what governments and the public need to know. The successes have largely come from getting vast segments of national populations to stay home in order to prevent the further spread of COVID-19. The failures have a lot to do with the politicization of messaging. The challenge of think tanks today is to provide for the public good without being tempted to stray into partisan politics. Whether we can turn this into a reality depends on think tank leadership being focused on this outcome, which requires a good degree of fearlessness. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a new phrase, the infodemic. Thanks for clearing a path through that. We have heard from each of you fascinating presentations. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the next round of question and answers. We've been going for a while, so let's turn this into a little bit of a lightning round and keep answers fairly short. But I want to come back to Professor Wong. I think about an hour ago we were speaking, and we have questions from our viewers that have been conveyed to me. So here's one for you, Professor Wong. How can we ensure a sustainable dialogue and constructive communication between the think tank world, general public, academia, and decision makers?
Thank you, Jonathan. I think this is very important question. So I think I respect all the media and think tank scholars who have worked hard for this pandemic, as my friends right now said. That what I want to say is that we haven't done enough, so we need dialogue. So the first thing is that, well, is whether we know we have the consensus to realize nowadays the problem was very, very, very serious. It's very how to say, I think that in order to fight against the pandemic, we need not only the consensus of medical experts to produce more effective vaccines, but also the consensus of the media and think tank. So first of all, the consensus of value and ideology in crisis, in this crisis, as we did in World War II. Let's think about what we did in World War II, right? I think nowadays it's a real third World War. The difference from the World War II is that the enemy is not Hitler, but the virus. So I think that if we have such a consensus, then all the people can sit together and talk about the unique target, that is the destroy the virus. So this is very, very important. If without this consensus, I think that we cannot sit together. So this is what I want to say. And secondly is that, as Michael said right now, think tank and media need to enhance their influence on government. Think tank and media represent the responsibility of intellectuals. So how to guard the government is very, very important. Yes, we have our own job, but in crisis, we have the full responsibilities to teach, to guard the government. So I agree that all the friends said that the social media, nowadays social media has a very big impact to the society's process. But even that, I think that we should do a lot, do more, much more than before. So this is my answer, Johnson.
Okay, so thank you. I want to pick up off of essentially a challenge that you made before, and I want to go to Michael Holtzman to answer this. I'd like, Michael, can you give us an assessment of the impact of the disagreements in the White House over how to combat COVID-19? I mean, as Professor Wong brought up, what should Americans or people around the world make of the public fights between President Trump and his top coronavirus advisor, Dr. Tony Fauci?
Well, nothing that this administration does has any precedent, and certainly the way it has communicated and articulated policy, as Dr. Wong mentioned earlier, that this is an administration that has made policy via Twitter, which is superseded or undermined or circumvented the people who are in the administration, who are supposed to be thinking about these questions, looking around corners, making assessments, giving advice that the president then weighs. That has not happened here, because this is a president who is supremely confident in his abilities and being as diplomatic as I can, but supremely confident in his understanding. He understands ISIS better than the generals. It is very much that type of mentality here at work. So there are think like tank structures within the administration. I worked in the policy planning office at the State Department, and that was exclusively aimed at looking around corners on future threats and just thinking about out of the box about U.S. policy. All of that is discarded right now, or even if it is producing anything worthy, it is not making it up to number one, because he keeps his own counsel on a lot of these issues. And at times, his behavior and his pronouncements are more tempered by polling than they are by scholarly advice. So this is a big difference. All presidents think about their polls, and they think about, what will happen if this were to occur, et cetera. But this is a president who is really much focused on his personal popularity, whether or not people approve of what he's doing, where his base is at any given issue or question. And so if he is listening to anybody, he's listening to those polls that are saying that your base like this, they don't like this, and this is basically a television producer's mentality. So I think the American people are deeply concerned by it, and they've bifurcated between people who support Fauci as saying this is, an independent expert. He's somebody who has dedicated his entire life to pandemics and examining these, has seen it all before. And then there's this guy who claims he knows more than Fauci. Maybe you should look with some sort of infrared beam inside your body to see if that could potentially kill the virus. So I think that that's led to, again, a very divisive approach to American response, because it's allowed what are political disagreements to be overlaid onto policy pronouncements and to public health. And the same people, if they have, his base have a toothache, they go to a dentist who's a scientist and says, you need to have this done, here's an x-ray. If there's a bridge that says 99% of structural engineers say don't go across the bridge, most of them won't go across the bridge, but suddenly question science, suddenly question data, because it, like so much else in our nation, has become hyper-politicized. And it is crippling. It is crippling in terms of our response. There's a reason why the U.S. is now lagging behind, why the U.S. has a higher rate of infection, why the U.S. Numbers continue to be terrifying, despite the fact that there's a plateau. It is because we have politicized questions that maybe we wouldn't have many, many years ago. Now, again, I don't want to just be on the bandwagon and say this is all completely new. This has never happened before. It happened in the United States once before, where we rejected science, where we said this is not a fact, this is a conspiracy. And that was over the smoking debate back in the 70s and 80s, when scientists and doctors and others saying there is proof here. But there was a constituency of people who denied that, and led by corporations and others who believed that their products were not, or maybe they were harmful, as it turns out. But we've been this way for some time in this country, where we subordinate the public good for the private need, or the private want. And it is a sorry aspect of our character that we do this. And it's really become that more pronounced in this era, in which everybody can find evidence for their theories on YouTube. They can find supporting evidence for the president's statements on coronavirus from a random post on the internet. And so it's that confluence that's made this so terribly dangerous. So I think it's led to an awful lot of confusion. It's led to an awful lot of needless suffering.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Let me pose this one to Stephen. It's from a viewer, and the question is: media should report on this pandemic in a politically neutral way. Yet we see the media spinning stories to support their political views, losing the trust of the public, as Michael and Professor Wong have alluded to. What is it going to take for this to change, and what can think tanks provide to help us sort through the confusion?
Yes, it's a key issue, I think. I think the example that occurs to me most evidently is a case of UK, where the evidence suggests that since the pandemic took hold, people have been returning to the BBC as the one reliable source of information that they can trust. And this is quite interesting, because the government that was elected at the end of last year has pursued a general policy of non-cooperation with the BBC. Indeed, Boris Johnson's government is behaving like a campaign rather than a government. It's continuing to fight the Brexit campaign, and it's seeking internal enemies that it can basically put in their place. So there was evident government hostility towards the BBC, but people have actually, the approval of the BBC has noticeably gone up over the last 6 months because it is seen as a neutral and reliable source of information. So yes, I would agree that people, particularly in times of crisis, will cling on to something that they see as a reliable source. The issue, of course, is how to justify a publicly funded public service broadcast organization during perhaps more normal times, when because of the proliferation of so many sources of news. The situation we have is a virtual free-for-all, with people choosing to access the most conspiratorially minded sources over Facebook and of course all the other sources. So it's yes, there should be reliable news, but how can we sustain that? How can publicly funded news be justified? I personally, in the case of the BBC, I would defend it, but it's coming under greater and greater attacks all the time. The way in which the BBC operates, and one of the obvious avenues, one of the obvious sticks to beat the BBC with is the fact that it's funded from public money.
So let's pose that to Pete Clifton and sharpen it with this question from the audience. The main challenge in the relation between media and think tanks is that most media organizations are searching for fast news, and therefore they do not care about the validity of the information, but rather the speed of the information. While think tanks are focusing more on validating the information and analyzing it scientifically. How can think tanks and media work together and deal with this challenge? Pete.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's a degree of truth in that, of course, in that there is a great focus on speed, and I've talked about the need for speed for us. We are serving a whole range of breaking news channels, so there is always a need for us as a respectable news agency to be seen to be across breaking news, because that's what news is. People want to know about things as they happen. I think the task for us is to make sure that we're noted and responsible in the way that we deliver that breaking news. So we don't take flyers on stories that we think might be happening. We always establish that we've got a verified source before we go with a breaking news story, and then speed is of the essence. But then it's really what you do beyond that. So once you've got the story out, the next question we'll always be asking in the newsroom is, well, who do we need to call to get a view on this, a counter view? Is there a background that we can write ourselves that gives some more supporting evidence around what has happened, what might happen next? Is there a timeline of events we can introduce to give people an idea of how this story has developed previously? Are there think tanks we can go to for some additional perspectives? Legitimate news organisation, certainly the BBC, would never expect not to be covering breaking news as quickly as it can, but then it's really what you do in the wider context that's important, I think. The other thing I'd say, which I think there's some hope around, is, everybody talks about chasing clickbait and everybody chasing to the bottom just to get as many clicks as they can. And, that can be pretty unpalatable. I think as more, certainly of our customers, look at models for subscription around their content, I think, you can see a bit of a move away from that. They're starting to, I think, to think more about, I hope, more responsible journalism, and thinking about how they can cover things in the kind of detail that I've described, because it's for that kind of added value that people may pay a subscription, rather than just for the the quick out the trap stores, if you like. So I think I sense that there's a bit of a change going on, I think, in that model for what's funding our media industry in the UK, you know, the whole print side of the business is going downhill. It has to be a lot more about digital. And if that's the case, I think people have to think a lot more about the quality of the content they provide to make it something that people will want to pay for. Because again, advertising isn't really supporting the digital side of the business either. So I think it's around why you will in the future get people to come and pay some of their money to actually see what you've done. And that, I hope, will continue to raise the bar.
Okay, thank you for that. This question is for Professor Wang. China is not easily compared to any Western country in terms of the diversity of views in its media or social media regarding COVID-19. Does this make policymaking more focused in Beijing?
Let me turn on. Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Very good question. I feel very, to my honestly, I think the China's voice in the international society are so weak, are very, very weak. Few people in the world can listen what Chinese think, what China government did in the past many years, especially since the Deng Xiaoping period in the past 40 years. But I think that was a very, very important reason. I don't believe it or not. China is it has a very long civilization, but China is a very young and modern state, modern country. So it's very young. China it's a very conservative country, which are not very good to communicate with the international society. So I think that as a think tank scholar, what I did every day, even every day, I often engage with my official friends. Even right now, a few minutes ago, one of very important officials, he sent a WeChat to me, and I asked them, I persuade him to learn from you. I said, this seminar, this symposium are very, very important. We, Chinese government, should organize such a symposium, such a seminar like we did now. So I think that, but on the other hand, China, I believe that China will learning by doing. Maybe 10 years later or long years later, they will do much better than now. But for my foreign friends, one of my very useful and pragmatic suggestion is that how to say, I think that try your best to search what the China government thinking or say. Like I said right now, for the new Cold War, all the Chinese people, all the Chinese officials don't need Cold War. For the conflict between China and the United States, President Trump every day Twitter and talking about China, but President Xi Jinping of China never mentioned about the United States. China keep the patience with the United States. So I think that just try to learn to understand a new China, a modern China. Of course, on the other hand, help China to engage with the world. So this is my answer, Johnson.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Dr. Bruni, could you tell me what it looks like to you in this shootout between the US and China over COVID in Australia?
I was actually quite struck by what Professor Wang just said, but also his earlier comment about, trying to put down our cudgels and focus on our efforts with regard to COVID-19. I think that he and I would be of an agreement with regard to, I think that would be a lovely idea. However, right now, under current conditions, I can't see that happen. Because one of the things that's been missing in this whole debate, I think, is one word: diplomacy. Diplomacy seems to have also been one of the casualties of this information war we've been conducting, not only with the Chinese, but also among ourselves. We like the baser instinct. We're always looking for that kind of bit of entertainment in our factoids. So we feel good about ourselves, or we can mock someone, or, do that kind of thing. That is not a good look for us. And quite frankly, the lack of diplomacy is a net detriment to us. And by diplomacy, I mean, it doesn't mean that we have to actually unify. Professor Wang and I will probably have many disagreements with regard to, you name it, South China Sea, whatever. I'm an Australian. I love my country. You're in China. You love your country, and that's great. And I respect that. But diplomacy doesn't require us to see each other from the same perspective. What it does require us to do is respect each other. Okay, so you have a different view, I have a different view. I'll push, you push. Eventually, we'll come to the middle. And the other thing about diplomacy too, which you raised, sir, if you don't mind me saying, is that, World War II, you brought up World War II. Well, yes, World War II was very important because, the Western Allies cooperated with Stalin. I don't think that there was anything that Churchill or Roosevelt or even Truman wanted from the Soviet Union in terms of importing Soviet culture or whatever. It was just that they had the greater threat of Adolf Hitler, and they cooperated in spite of their differences. And we are not getting there. And this is a problem. It's a problem here in Australia because I hear all the shrill cries about this, that, and the other. And I know that from my great CNN watching these days, leading up to the presidential election, I mean, there's a lot of this sort of political shenanigans going on, and you do get caught up. I mean, I don't think that people can't see that this tide is washing all over us, and it's breaking down civility. But anyway, that's where I stand.
Jonathan, you didn't turn on your voice. No voice, Jonathan.
Huh?
Okay, I'm back.
Can I have some?
Go ahead.
Okay, John. Actually, I agree with you that partly that we should respect each other. Of course, like we did now. About China's diplomacy, I think that I agree partly with you that China should do much better than before. Should keep open, sustainable open policy, and keep the engaged dialogue with every countries. And for those points, I agree totally. But on the other hand, that is one of my suggestions is that I think that for West, especially for United States, Trump administration, they should respect China too. Nowadays is that a lot of think tank and media in the West, they identify or report China as a second Soviet Union. I think this is unfair. This is not correct. China is not a second Soviet Union. And also, you look at the past 40 years. China is a unique big power without war. without launching war, without involving war. So of course, we have a few attention with neighbor, but you know, China has 22 neighbor countries. We have so many contradictions with neighbor countries. But even that, you look at the history in the past 40 years, no any war with the neighbor countries, right? Not like the Soviet Union did, not like the United States did. How many wars U.S. launched in the past 40 years?
I'm gonna step in because
so
we're getting.
So I think that just keep calm and respect each other, like you said, John, and dialogue each other. Nowadays, we are in a very dangerous period between China and the U.S. I thought many months ago in February or in March, we should sit together and discuss how to deal with the virus. But in the past 4 or 5 months, we didn't. But for China side, we sell a lot of masks to United States. You guess how many? 10 billion. No. 20 billion masks China sell to United States, help United States people, American people. So and also, if you listen, our foreign minister, Mr. Wang Yi, always talking about we should dialogue with the United States, but no any response from the White House, from the Mr. Pompeo, no any dialogue, no any cooperation. So I think that I agree with you, respect each other and listen each other. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. We are coming toward the end of this E-Symposium, and I want to give each of you a minute to sum up, having listened to each other. I'd like you to just tell us some final thoughts. So let me go first to Jeffrey Hyde.
Thank you. I'll just build on a point that Pete Clifton had raised about speed in the media. And I think that what we're seeing is a need to break out of our comfort zones. I appreciate also what Michael had said about creating a war room at CFR. That's something I discussed with Lisa Shields there. I know that we need to improve the ability for think tanks and media perhaps to operate at a little bit closer to similar speeds. Our think tank certainly prefers to operate at in terms of months or even years in terms of how long it takes to get research out the door. But the pandemic has made us adapt, and we are at times at least doing it in matters of weeks or days. Just last week, we had one of our researchers who previously was very much social media averse, had engaged with some reporters via Twitter. We got some research out the door having to do with unemployment in the US. We actually shared some of the research before it was ready under embargo. We got it ready, and we got the word out via the Washington Post. Anyway, it strikes me as an example of adaptation and speed, and I think we need more of both.
Okay. Final thoughts from Michael Holtzman.
I agree with Jeffrey's perspective on this. I think so much of this crisis is a real cautionary tale for really all industries. It's a real inflection point, looking at what went wrong, what went right, how can we build ourselves or rebuild ourselves in some ways, or innovate in a way that makes us more resilient and more proactive and more part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And I think a lot of folks looking at these institutions right now would not necessarily see them all as part of the solution, but rather part of a problem. So that to me is a very interesting next step or after action report that will occur, is this period of self-examination and inflection on the part of think tanks and the media and various other sectors about how they can improve and innovate so that we do this better, because this is the world we live in now, and we ignore it at our own peril.
Okay, over to you, Pete Clifton in the UK.
Well, yeah, I guess from my perspective, the noisier things become and the more unpleasant social media is, and the claims and counterclaims and spin and so on that become part of this agenda, the more important responsible, impartial news gathering is. And that's why organisations like mine, I think, are more important than ever in standing for those principles. There are numerous examples of media organisations that are slimming down now because of the economic pinch. They have fewer specialists, they have less time, and part of our role is to support those organisations and make sure that we stand firm behind our principles that we've always had, because they're more important than ever. I think it's important that we have great relations with think tanks to help us in that quest, because that's often where we can get the kind of impartial, clear research and thinking that we require to do that role. And I think we should also celebrate the good things that come out of a time like this. There's an awful lot of bad things happen, but if the push for us to get more traction for the automation of content that we've been doing for the last couple of years, if that's one of the things that comes of this and it allows us to build on that and do more of that in the future, the need for us to shine a light on what's happening in local towns around, the things that they pay their taxes for, that won't go away after the coronavirus. So I think we need to build on some of the positive things that have happened and plow on. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I am going to, because of the shortness of time, say thank you to Professor Wong and Dr. Bruni, and ask Stephen Blackwell to sum up from perspective of trends, if you could give us a final word of where you see this going.
Well, I've enjoyed the session immensely. I think a lot of interesting points have come up. I think, again, the key issue is referencing to an extent what Pete just said, this balance between the kind of wild west of the media, the social media, the fragmentation, the proliferation of content of very dubious integrity, while at the same time, there is a place for organizations that show integrity, who are relatively neutral and objective. And I'm sort of cautiously optimistic that the value of such objective organizations has been reaffirmed in recent months. So we're certainly not out of the woods yet. I would not like to predict how the balance may alter or shift in the future, but there's a place for objective news, news of integrity based on facts, and think tanks have a very important role in supporting that kind of provision. So that's not really a conclusion, but that's based on the insights that I've been able to benefit from tonight. I would certainly reaffirm the value of a constructive media think tank relationship going forward. And very briefly, I'd just like to thank everyone again on behalf of Trends, yourself, Mr. Moderator, and all of our speakers. And it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
It really has been a fascinating session. I want to thank you, Stephen Blackwell in Abu Dhabi, Dr. Bruni in Adelaide. Go to sleep. Thank you, Pete Clifton in the UK, Jeffrey Hyde from RAND, Professor Wong. Really a pleasure to talk to you, and Michael Holtzman in the US. It's been a very broad discussion. I'm Jonathan Furziger in the Atlantic Council in Jerusalem. So thank you all, and good night.